Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tonight we're joined by Professor Olena Lennon of the University of New Haven, a leading voice on national security. We'll explore US policy toward Ukraine as the Trump administration weighs supplying Kyiv with long-range Tomahawk missiles, a move that Moscow calls escalatory. We'll also explore Putin's broader strategy, NATO's response to Russian incursions, nuclear risk, and much more. Professor, welcome to TVP World. Great to have you in the studio.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's start with the Tomahawks. Now, these are long-range missiles. Ukraine can hit Moscow from Ukrainian territory. And it was something that President Biden was reluctant to give to Ukraine. But there's been a shift with Trump. Tell us how you see that whole situation. How do you read it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important to point out that Trump is not giving Tomahawks to Ukraine. He's willing to sell Tomahawks to Ukraine. And the money that Ukraine is expected to potentially be using is NATO's money. So NATO is buying these capabilities for Ukraine. So I think it's a very important distinction. And Trump's administration is keen on emphasizing that it's a business deal for both countries, and that Ukrainians are buying these advanced capabilities. Secondly, whether it's different from Biden administration's policy, yes and no. Biden was known for incrementally supplying Ukraine, and he got a lot of criticism for that. But at the same time, Biden was also a big supporter of Ukraine. His policy was a bit more cautious and risk-averse. Trump, his leadership style in general is more risk-taking, unpredictable, and I think that this move is part of a pressure campaign to show Russia that that the United States is willing to put that additional pressure that the Biden administration was not willing to do. And I think that Trump in general likes to be different from Biden. I think that is definitely one consistent theme in Trump's foreign policy, is that he is keen on doing things differently.
Right.
And that is also part of the message campaign, but it's targeted at a domestic audience more so than international audience.
Understood. Okay, so he has those reasons, as you just laid out. But at the end of the day, if Ukraine does get those missiles, it is a game changer, isn't it?
It could be. I think in general, the war now is defined by innovation, adaptation, and Ukraine has successfully closed that capability gap, or is approaching that military balance that they have been trying to achieve. Because of Ukraine's innovation and ingenuity on the battlefield in the defense industry, these missiles could obviously kind of close that gap. Whether it's a game changer, I wouldn't go that far. There's no silver bullet. I think it's a combination of everything. Just because Ukraine may potentially have this capability doesn't mean that they will be, it will be escalatory, that they will be deploying these weapons necessarily. I think it's part of a, again, pressure campaign that is seen to be in combination with economic pressure, political pressure, and military pressure. But at the end of the day, economic pressure comes first, because Ukrainians, with whatever capabilities they have, that they have deployed into Russia's territory, they only targeted military targets. They only targeted oil refineries, various warehouses, and energy facilities, showing that the number one goal for Ukraine is to deny Russia an ability to continue prosecuting this aggressive war. So Ukrainians are not trying to, be offensive in terms of intentionally killing Russians, as the Russians have been doing. That these are very well calibrated, strategically aimed tools to deny Russia an ability to continue its war. So I think that is an important part of the story, that Ukraine is a very responsible player. And is one that is a strategic partner to the West that could be trusted in handling these weapons responsibly.
Well, I don't think many people would disagree with you on that, Professor. But economic pressures. We're talking about bombing oil refineries and so on. We're also talking about sanctions. They take time in which to take effect. Whereas every day people are dying on the battlefield, and so we need something that's a little bit faster. Now, Tomahawks are one option. Of course, they aren't there yet, but we'll see. But the other, of course, is the way that Ukraine has made use of technology in drone warfare to level up the battlefield. How has that impacted what's going on the front lines?
Immensely. Again, on the one hand, yes, the drone warfare has exponentially changed this battlefield. And also, like I said before, it closed the gap in a way. And it made the war more symmetric, because now the Russians are actually receiving, on the receiving end of these attacks. And in that way, Ukrainians are, have a better hand at a negotiating table. On the other hand, again, there's no silver bullet. It's not, drones have not made the war less lethal. Because on both sides, the war continues to be taking an immense human toll. So people are continuing to die on both sides. So the illusion that drones will save human lives, unfortunately, is just that, an illusion. But like you said, at the end of the day, the war requires a multidimensional. The solution to this problem is not in just better technology or more weapons or better weapons or sanctions. It's all of that, and pressure has to come from all sides in all domains. And you rightfully pointed out that sanctions can only do so much. But they're also an important component of that international isolation and economic pressure to reduce Russia's ability to prosecute the war, to reduce its combat power. Will the Russians, end the war because of sanctions? Of course not. But will sanctions buy time for Ukraine and potentially save more Ukrainian lives, who are the only ones who are actually in harm's way dealing with Russia? Absolutely. Every little bit helps. So
Right.
Now is not the time to take one ingredient out. It's all of it. But sanctions, again, they haven't necessarily collapsed the Russian economy, but it put a big enough dent to where the Russians have to seek the help of the Chinese, of the Iranians, to compensate for those losses.
Well, yes, but one would have thought so, and one sees that they're looking for help. But on the other hand, they're being more belligerent, aren't they, with incursions into NATO airspace, drones, fighter jets over Estonia, and so on. What's that all about? What's Putin's game plan here?
Well, we can only speculate. We don't know what it's all about. But if we were to follow the pattern of Russia's hybrid war, then I think that it's a pretty good guess that it's both psychological warfare to test NATO's resolve and also to sow panic and discord. But it's also very pragmatic in terms of, I think the Russians are testing NATO's capabilities and NATO's response. And in some ways, they're also testing if NATO would be willing to expand very expensive air defense missile to shoot down very cheap drones. I think part of it is a basic sort of calculus game where if NATO partners use very expensive missiles to shoot down Russian drones, then that's one of the ways to exhaust NATO's air defense, and that's the tactic that the Russians have been using in Ukraine. So I think it's a combination of testing a response, but also in depleting NATO's capabilities and creating multiple dilemmas for NATO leaders.
But Russia simply can't afford. It's barely holding its own in Ukraine. It can't afford to open up new fronts with NATO, can it?
It cannot, and that's why it's trying to do as much on the cheap as possible. And part of its strategy is precisely create is fear-mongering, right? Is create that sense of panic and to again inflict multiple dilemmas on NATO leaders because Russia knows that one of the biggest problems that NATO partners have is coordination problems. Trying to coordinate a response to these incursions has proven to be quite difficult because we have seen a range of responses, from a harsher stance coming out of Poland, for example, to a more a muted response from Western capitals. And now which is the Warsaw Security Forum, where the range of responses was on full display, with some members, Western allies, Western European countries saying that it's a bait. Let's not take that bait. Because that's what the Russians want NATO partners to do. They're planting that bait to see how they would take it. That's a very cautious response. And then, of course, on the other side, we have the Baltic countries and Poland that are saying that everything that enters airspace, NATO's airspace, has to be shot down.
Well, Turkey did it.
Exactly.
Exactly. With Russian aircraft. Now, in the last couple of minutes that we have left. President Trump called Russia a paper tiger recently, and one would have thought that Putin would have thrown up his hands and Lavrov would be shouting and screaming about it. But instead, Lavrov was talking at the UN conference last week about a next round of talks between Russia and the United States. What's the dynamic there?
Well, the Russians want to be at the table with the United States, not with Ukraine. And that's what they mean by talks. When the Russians are calling for talks, they mean Ukraine must surrender. They mean that Zelensky is not a legitimate leader, and Putin will never sit down with Zelensky at the same table, never. And he's made that clear, that Russia's terms of peace are for Ukraine to accept what basically adds up to surrender, to forego their ambitions to join NATO, to disarm, and so on and so on. So when the Russians say they're ready for talks, they mean only great powers will decide the fate of Ukraine. And by the great powers, they're willing to accept American leadership there and maybe EU leaders, maybe.
But and they include themselves, of course. As
exactly. So I wouldn't read into it, and I think Trump is only now beginning to develop a better understanding of those dynamics. Unfortunately, there was a lot of time lost with the red carpet rolled out in Alaska. That was a wasted opportunity and a freebie that they gave to Russia. But I think now Trump has a better understanding. Having tried and failed, he now understands.
Well, absolutely. As you say, President Trump is unpredictable. Let's hope that he's moving in the right direction. Professor Lennon, thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though. Lots more coming up, as always. Bye-bye.